Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. The next big contender we're expected to get is former Vice President Mike Pence, who is scheduled in Iowa on Wednesday to announce a 2024 campaign. Let's listen to a clip of him in Iowa on Sunday explaining what his campaign would look like if he entered the race.
Should we enter the race later this week, I'm very confident that we'll have the support to be able to carry our message, to tell our story, which is not just my years as vice president, but also years as a governor of a conservative state, leading a conservative agenda and record employment, and also being a conservative leader in the Congress of the United States, fighting against the big spenders in my own party, and all throughout that standing without apology for the sanctity of life and traditional values. So I know we'll have the resources to be able to tell our story, and my hope is, should we enter the race, that by the time people are making decisions, we won't just be well known, we'll be known well.
Bill, how do you size up that message just to provide the context for Vice President's remark there? In the current Real Clear Politics average, he is in fourth with 3.8% of the vote.
Yeah, I like Mike Pence a lot. I think he's a conviction politician, very conservative. I think in the Trump administration, he was a force for good, solid conservative policies, and he had a credibility with the Congress that President Trump might not have had. So I think we got a far more conservative Trump administration than we would have had without him. That said, I think he has a fatal flaw. He was very principled in his reaction to January 6th. He resisted the efforts to interfere, and I think he was constitutionally absolutely correct. But I think his problem is that the people who like Donald Trump don't like him because they think he's disloyal. I mean, Donald Trump basically called him a coward. And the people who don't like Donald Trump blame him for being Donald Trump's vice president. So I think he has a hard road. Are there enough voters, in between those camps? I don't know. But it'll certainly be interesting in the debate. Certainly if Donald Trump's part of it, he's going to have something to say about Mike Pence. And it might be far more salient and explosive than anything said about Donald Trump by Chris Christie or vice versa.
I guess my thought, Kate, on January 6th is that his persona now, his legacy is so intertwined with that he can't exactly run away from it. But maybe he is betting that in the eyes of many of these Republican supporters who backed Trump to the bitter end, maybe in the light of day here a couple of years later, they are more willing to give him a hearing on his point of view, and he can do a reintroduction to those people and get across the finish line with them. It also strikes me as a potential for a more traditional sort of Reaganite conservatism. There are candidates in the race, Ron DeSantis being one, who are clearly taking a very Trump lane. And Kate, I don't know if this is a winning bet for Mike Pence, but he seems to be thinking that maybe there's still some juice left in the old Reagan coalition of people who support, for example, supporting Ukraine.
Right, Kyle. I mean, I think you're right that Pence really shouldn't run from January 6th and should explain to the public how seriously he took his obligations to the Constitution, which I think says something good about him. And I think he could make that case to the base. I also think, he's running on this style of fusion Reaganism, getting back to some of Reagan's principles: strong economy, strong military, sound money. Those are good themes, and they are still potent themes, I think, with the country. I also think the country is looking for leadership on some of these issues. Ukraine would be a case in point on, they want to be someone to persuade them about why it is in our national interest for us to make these donations of equipment. They want to understand what we're trying to accomplish and trying to keep Vladimir Putin off of NATO's border. I am interested in Pence because he seems to take that persuasion role very seriously, the way that Reagan did. And so I am not sure if he will succeed in his uphill climb with the base, because he does have some unique liabilities from January 6th and how polarizing that has become. But I do think his candidacy is a good sign for the country and represents something that I think still really does exist deeply across the country.
I also think these dueling announcements this week show something about the political geography of these early states. Chris Christie making his announcement in New Hampshire, where he's sort of a Northeastern guy, Mike Pence, the Indiana governor, going to Iowa. And Bill, I guess that would be my devil's advocate case for Pence, is maybe he thinks he's a guy who can go out to these diners in Iowa and connect with voters in a way that some of the other candidates can't. We've talked a little bit about, perceived at least, charisma challenges of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And so maybe that's his bet, is that he can go to every county in Iowa, all 99 of them, and connect with people as a fellow Heartlander and make the connection and make the case that he's a traditional, long-standing conviction conservative, and he has the experience. Unlike some of his competitors, he's the combination of those things. Bill, have I convinced you a little bit or no?
Well, I think that's definitely the strategy of Pence in this election. And I think it might work. Look, a lot depends on how hard President Trump's supporter is. He has a big lead, but I don't take that lead as a solid, I won't consider anyone else. There's a lot of time in this campaign. A lot of things can happen. A lot of gas can take people out. I think a lot of that support for Trump is really people saying, I don't trust the liberal media. And they say Trump because they know it annoys people. And so I think there is room for another Republican candidate. I don't know whether it's Donald Trump going to lose to DeSantis. Maybe it's Tim Scott. Maybe it's Pence. But I think that's a serious thing. One thing Trump has proved, he's not afraid of the media. He can turn to his advantage, as he did with CNN. The interview was so obnoxious. Trump turned it to his advantage. It's not clear he can do that with Republican contenders for the nomination. I think he's afraid of them. You know, you mentioned if they're all on stage and he's not there. I mean, my nightmare is that he hosts an event during the first debate and he's live tweeting his reaction to the debate. And the question is, will Republican voters let him off the hook or not? I kind of agree with Kate. That's fraught with danger for him because they can say some things and he might look cowardly in refusing to go up against anyone, which he didn't in 2016.
One candidate who is bowing out of the race this week, though, is New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu. He did so in a Washington Post op-ed. I'm not running for president in 2024. Beating Trump is more important. And Kate, the Journal's editorial today points out a couple pieces of advice that Chris Sununu offers in this op-ed. Here's the first one. He says, to win, Republicans need our message to appeal to new voters. We can do this without sacrificing classic conservative principles of individual liberty, low taxes, and local control. But we must abandon the issues that are solely made for social media headlines, such as banning books or issuing curriculum fiats to local school districts hundreds of miles away. Kate, what do you make of that?
Well, Kyle, I think that suggests, as our editorial did, that he's not the guy for the hour. I thought he had some good advice to candidates mainly to know when to drop out. In 2016, John Kasich comes to mind, the Ohio governor, as someone who didn't know when to drop out, and then probably helped Trump at the margins. But on the point, I think it's really unfortunate to see him basically adopt this narrative on the left, that some of his political opponents are banning books or wading into the culture wars. I mean, Glenn Youngkin won in Virginia because he had the great fortune of having an opponent who said that parents shouldn't be deciding what schools can teach, and voters don't agree with that. I mean, Ron DeSantis did his margins on some of these issues. Now, of course, it's possible to go too far into school curriculum issues, but for instance, deciding a book is more appropriate in the middle school library as opposed to the elementary school library is not a book ban. Deciding a book of poetry is simply not very good and not worth reading is not a ban. It's curriculum selection. I mean, so some of these issues, I think voters really see them differently. And I think there's room for a candidate who understands that and can synthesize it with some of the other things Sununu's talking about, which are being a party of addressing inflation and core pocketbook issues, lower taxes, some traditional Republican ideas, and expanding its base that way. But I don't think maligning some of these issues that matters to voters is a way to expand the party.
That seems right to me, and especially at a time where a lot of these conservatives feel like they are not the aggressors in these culture wars. They are trying to get their schools to teach the same kind of curriculum that their schools have always taught when their kids were in the lower grades or when they happened to be at those schools. Bill, Kate mentions the other piece of advice from Chris Sununu, and here it is in his words. No one can stop candidates from entering the race, but candidates with no path to victory must have the discipline to get out. Anyone polling in the low single digits by this winter needs to have the courage to hang it up and head home. And Bill, I guess give him credit for leading by example there.
Right, I do. First, I want to say on the previous issue, it's interesting that culture warrior is a term only applied to Republicans. It's never applied to the left. I mean, Joe Biden calls the Republican Party or half its members white supremacists and all sorts of things. And he's never called a culture warrior. Ron DeSantis is. So it's a term of derision designed to paint people as extremists and say the issue shouldn't even come up. So effectively, it's a council of unilateral surrender, as you say, to people that are frequently the aggressors in this matter. As far as getting out, yes, I think that's it. One of the unfortunate things about primaries is that they build up candidates for like a radio show, TV show, or something. So it's free PR as long as they're in it. That's why a lot of people never say that they're not running for president, because they want to be quoted and taken seriously. And once you say that, you're kind of forgotten. So I agree with them on that. They should get out of the way. But if they don't, they have to be beaten by the other people. And so the path to winning is not to persuade other people to step out and let me win. It's to defeat them with a better message.
Kate, do you think that this is about the field that Republican voters are going to get now, that the primary process is about set? We do have another candidate getting in this week, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, reportedly. And there have been some rumors also that Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin could potentially start a campaign later this year, particularly if the state legislative races in Virginia go his way. But do you think that there's still time for that? Or are we getting to a place where these are the candidates who've announced they're going to be starting to debate here in August, which is not that far away, and the Republican primary voters are going to have to choose between the people who are on stage?
Yeah, I think there's been sort of an odd impulse to declare the primaries over really prematurely. So I think the race is very much still taking shape. And even between now and August, a lot can happen. More folks can get in, or somebody could really start to attract a real following who hasn't yet. Tim Scott of South Carolina is somebody who had a pretty good announcement, an optimistic campaign rooted in patriotism, faith, hard work. I mean, these are good themes. He could attract a following. There are also, to your point, other people could jump in. One thing I thought that was odd about what Sununu had to say about him getting out is that he can be more candid on the sidelines, but there's plenty of room to be candid in the race. And so there is an opportunity to get in and, like Bill said, make a case to defeat Donald Trump or tackle the ideas and persuade people. I think Youngkin would be a particularly interesting late entrant because his brand of politics is often compared with DeSantis. In fact, I just did that, but they are very temperamentally different. They have chosen different tactics and different debates. Youngkin doesn't have a legislature as willing as to go along with his ideas. He hasn't accomplished as much as DeSantis has, but he's also taken a more conciliatory tone, focused perhaps a little bit more at the margins on being a uniter. So there may be an audience there for a governor like him who's done well in a state that is much more blue than Florida.
But even without him, it is not as if there is a small field here. Just to read the names, we have Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, Vivek Ramaswamy, Tim Scott, Glenn Youngkin potentially, Chris Christie, Larry Elder, Asa Hutchinson, governor of Arkansas, Doug Burgum, and maybe a few other minor candidates in there, but there's plenty there to choose from, it seems to me. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Bill. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.